All right, welcome everyone to the Academic Affairs Committee meeting on March the 10th. This is immediately following the commission meeting, which wrapped up early. And so I do want to start by calling the roll. Larry Turner, you're the chair of this committee.
Oh, really?
Yes.
I don't know.
You're here. Charles Bunn,
Here.
Timothy Guyan,
Here.
and Ann Sermon. All right, we've got everybody fully here in person, which is great. And for those who are joining us remotely, if you have questions, you're welcome to put them in the chat, but primarily, I imagine y'all will be listening to us. All right, so we have one item. Where's my? There we go. Thank you. All right, so we called our roll and we need a motion to approve the agenda. There's one item, discussion of proposed changes to the commission's administrative procedures for program review.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, all those in favor of accepting this agenda item for discussion, and then we'll open the discussion.
Aye.
Hi, okay. So we are treating this as a kind of what we might call work session. So y'all are not expected to take votes or make decisions unless you feel that that's generated. But the discussion will be opportunity for you to learn more about what we're doing and where this initiative has come from, what its impacts are, and that way with hope that we'll be able to have some things on the next commission meeting. Y'all will be fully ensconced and be able to tell us your thoughts and keep us on the right track. And my hope is by the end of the meeting, you'll have a better understanding of what we're doing, but also a sense of if we need to meet again in between now and the next commission meeting in June. Okay. Okay, so to give you some background, overview of administrative procedures, that's what we're calling them. They're in technical terms called the Alabama Administrative Code. Using the word code kind of gets us into a little confusion around the Code of Alabama, which are the law, and these are the regulations that implement the law, the Code of Alabama. All right, they're available here on the website, which is done through the Legislative Services Agency in case y'all ever need to go look at them. And here we go. So when you click on this bar, it comes up with a list of choices, and you can very quickly see that there are quite a few state agencies, boards, departments, councils, and all of these have a different section of the administrative procedures. And AICS is down here at 300. That does not mean that there are 300. You can see the numbering isn't totally consecutive. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. All right, so just to give you a slightly deeper look. So here's, we got to 300. When you open up 300, these are all of the administrative procedures that apply to our agency. And the ones that the commission has reviewed for, or in fact, most recently are down here, 300, 412, Alabama Math and Science Teacher Education Program, AMSTEP. Every so often we hear some changes, I think, to the Alabama National Guard, educational assistance. So a lot of these have to do with those scholarship programs, grant programs that are run through AIC as the fiscal agent. But for our purposes, we're up here toward the top, talking about 300-1 program review. All right, there we are. And when you click on this, it brings up this table of contents. So for commissioners who are in the room, I passed out a hard copy version of the whole section, 300-1 on program review. That's the one with the little tabbies on it. in case you wanted to refer to administrative procedures as they exist currently. You can see that they're not slim. This particular section runs about, it looks like 64 pages. And that's why I tried to put the tabs for each of the subsections so you can kind of get your bearings through the document.
Thank you.
Yes, the definitions are kind of long, actually, but you know. So in case you want to refer to something, that's what it's for. But I want to spend most of our time today talking about giving you a sense of each section and the changes that are being discussed for each section and why we're doing it. Okay. All right, but before we go through, I did want to ask my colleague, Dr. Stephanie Dolan, to talk us through the very recent, hot off the press executive order from the governor's office that is going to impact some of this work.
Yes. Hi, so it's executive order number 735. It was given out Wednesday, entitled Reducing Red Tape on Citizens and Businesses Through a Moratorium on New Administrative Rules and by establishing goals for the reduction of existing regulatory burdens. In that, I've given you have a copy of the full executive order in hand.
Should you want to look? Okay, yeah.
And so what I have done is just give an excerpt here, view here. The overall general policy is to reduce the unnecessary government regulations on our citizens and businesses. And in that, we have been asked to reduce by 25% of our discretionary regulatory restrictions. Of course, most of this, as you see, it is to citizens and businesses where we do not deal directly with those entities. But we still have these executive rules that she just shared with you. So we have until March 1st to actually go through all of this order of 2024, and it's been divided into 3 dates. What we're talking with you today actually falls under the subsection B, where the action is narrowly tailored to reduce or remove the regulatory burden to remove obsolete, outdated, or unnecessary rules. This is where we're actually feeling this belongs in this section here. And as you see the timeline, so it actually falls in a good time for us to be doing this, because part of what Dr. McGill has done is to reduce that work and to take outdated information and make it more pertinent to our time now.
Right. So what Dr. Dolan is saying is that we're actually ahead of the game. So the governor, as part of her second administration, has taken a number of executive actions, this being one of them, to create a more efficient state government. And so this is intended to, reduce that list of administrative procedures for all the agencies by 25% is basically what its aim is to do. And that means that they're not letting agencies put through new rules unless it meets one of these 2 criteria, A or B, unless it was already in the works, and ours is not officially on the books yet, so we don't need that one, or B, it's already trying to reduce regulatory burden, and that's where we feel we're ahead of the game. And you'll see as we start going through some of our recommended changes that this was work that already needs to happen, and I think you'll see that it's pretty clearly fitting within the scope of this action that the governor is suggesting. That's not to say we won't make other changes to the administrative codes during the time frame, because you saw that whole list had to do with scholarship requirements, and there's plenty more work that AIC can do. But for the purposes of reviewing academic programs, this is how we're proposing to proceed. Since y'all, we're upstairs at the commission meeting, that the majority of the business that the commission decides has to do with academic program review. And that's one of the reasons that this set of administrative procedures occurs so early on in the list of everything that AIC is charged with doing. Okay, so this particular page that you see up here has got these red new sections down at the bottom, and you all have been passed out a hard copy of this as well. You also received it yesterday in case you wanted to browse it ahead of time. But you can see that this is the same as the table of contents that is on the current policy, plus those new sections that we're potentially considering down at the bottom. And also all the way over to the right, you see that there is a column that shows some actions that have already taken place. So to give you a little bit of a sense, we've been working on this since last June. Once we identified that really there were some necessary changes and redundancies and obsolete things. And we've brought those up with our institutional stakeholders, and of which we've got a couple here in the room today. They're off camera, but they're here listening, and a couple online. And we've given them some background on this back in June that we wanted to launch this body of work. And then you can see, starting with section 300 to 103, there was an open forum that took place last August. And then we basically started doing open forums on each section every 2 to 3 weeks leading up to the holiday. That allowed us to give some proposals to our institutional stakeholders in a very clear and transparent way, and also meant that we could get their feedback on our potential ideas, identify roadblocks ahead of time, and also, just generally keep them in the loop, since they'll be the ones who are impacted by any changes that we make. Those who are in the room and online have been part of those open fora. I won't say anybody attended every single one, but people got the sense of it. We also posted them on AIC's webinar page. So anybody who's watching this meeting and wants to know, like, well, what did they talk about specifically for that section? Those webinars are still on AIC's webinar page, and along with all of the detailed documents. Okay, so similar to what we did before, I do want to kind of take you all through some of the proposed changes so you understand the scope of them and that you feel informed. So please do interrupt with questions, discussions, ask us what the institutions really thought about such and such. All right, so there's the original, and there's on the right is the one we're considering. Okay, so we're just going to kind of march on through, and I know several folks in the room have got commitments in the afternoon, so we're not going to be overly labored about it. All right, so this is our first section of the administrative procedure. Should you want to follow along in the full document, it's here, that is online. I'm sure we can get to the link. And so the first section is definitions, and this basically compiles everything that's in the whole document of program review into a single section, but it hasn't been amended since 1998. It's also organized in a way that's sort of thematic. It's a little bit inconsistent. So we haven't gone through and done a recompilation yet. Frankly, that'll be the last thing we do. Once we get through everything else, then we'll know what definitions we need to include, and we'll go ahead and put them in alphabetically. There are a lot of things that are outdated. A lot of the definitions, if you decide you want to read through them because you need some reading before bed, I'll put you to sleep, have to do with accreditation standards. So I'm sure y'all know the accreditor that our institutions all go through for their institutional accreditation, not just specialized subjects, is the Southern Association of Colleges and Schools Commission on Colleges. So that's SAC-COC. If you hear us say SACs or SAC-COC, that's the accreditor. And so everything we do, it should align with what they do. Otherwise, we get our institutions doing multiple sets of rules. But we certainly, as a commission, have different concerns than the accreditor. Their primary concern is academic quality. Is the institution proceeding in a way that ensures quality? I'm sure those in the room will say there are plenty of other functions, but I think that's one that's really at the core. And that also means financially responsible, enough staff, all those sorts of things. For us, our primary function obviously is to implement what the legislature has asked us to do. And for the purposes of program review, that means ensuring viability, ensuring quality, and also the business plan. Making sure that the program is a good steward of state funding for public institutions. So some of that you'll see kind of filtered out, but in the definition section, some of those definitions are going to align with what our accreditor is doing and that what our institutions are responding to. All right, do y'all have questions on this section? All right, so the second section. So this is a section 02 that is designed for non-Alabama institutions seeking state authorization. So we did not hold an open forum with our public institutions because this section does not apply to them. It only applies to institutions that are we call non-resident, so non-Alabama. And they are looking to offer courses to Alabama residents. And primarily this section applies to those offering courses in person. There are some institutions that just want to, what I've heard called beam in, like offer only online courses. And some of that is regulated by the National Council for State Authorization of Reciprocity Agreements. Alabama joined this national organization to offer distance education reciprocal standards across states. I guess it was just before I arrived, so maybe 5-6 years ago. And there's a state reciprocity committee that's in charge of that. So it is not a commission function per se, but they have delegated AIC staff to be the main implementer of the regulations around state reciprocity. Again, that only applies to distance ed. What it means is that our institutions can offer online courses to residents in other states, and institutional members from other states can offer courses to us. So this section doesn't regulate that. It only regulates the ones who are not part of this reciprocity agreement or who are offering courses physically in the state, so have an instructional site. We do this in tandem with the community college system. They have a division called private school licensure. So imagine these are your barbering schools, cosmetology schools, your CDL schools, and those need to have some this is the state authorization to operate in Alabama. That means they protecting their students, they've got bonds, all that sort of thing. So most of that work is done by community colleges. But AIC had historically, before the reciprocity thing, been a big regulatory player to protect for consumer protection of Alabama students. And so this is kind of a scaled down version of what that used to look like. You can see that this was amended in 2018, so that's pretty recent. And that amendment had to do with some of these changes around reciprocity. And so a lot of our regulations it needs a little bit of tidying up, frankly, to be more clear. But in terms of content, it's already been treated pretty recently. All right, hopefully I didn't totally confuse y'all. Does everybody feel like you kind of understand? It used to be a big part of AIC's business. I don't know, some of you have been around a couple of terms, maybe remember reviewing these private schools, but I see Commissioner Bryan is nodding, but we don't do that anymore. So that certainly helps keep the meeting shorter. All right, section 3. So this is a big important one. And in fact, this is the one that controls most of what we do at the AIC meetings, including the one that we just had. The majority of the items that the commission reviews are academic new program proposals. And this section that controls how new program proposals work was amended in 1999. That's a long time for things to sit without really being updated. And there has frankly been some drift, meaning that the way things are done now has drifted a little bit from the way the policy currently is written. And it has drifted in ways that allow for more flexibility. And that has been seen as a very good thing by our institutional partners. Hopefully they'll chime in and disagree with me if I go off the rails here. But the sections as they exist, so should you all want to dive into section 03, it's not as long as those definition sections, but it's very specific about the way review works for each degree level. So it goes through associate degree review, and then baccalaureate degree and graduate degrees. And I should note that the associate degree section does still refer to the Alabama Department of Post-Secondary Education, which no longer exists. That was a part of the Alabama State Board of Education. It has now been transformed into the Alabama Community College System. So the functions that used to be done by Department of Post-Secondary Ed now belong to ACCS. So that gives you a sense, frankly, of how much in need it is of being updated. So this definitely will fit within the executive order if we treat this section. Okay, so I talked through about how it's organized. But when you go through each of the review processes in that section, it gets very detailed about how paperwork moves between stakeholders. It'll say, you know, the proposal, the notice of intent to submit a proposal, or the intent, the ISPA is what it's called for community colleges, intent to submit a proposal authorization or something like that, goes to this agency and then this agency, and they have this much time to review it and that much time, and things have been much more streamlined. We recognize the stakeholders who need to review the paperwork. And we want to be able to write these sections to reflect their role, but not be as prescriptive about how paperwork flows and how much time it takes. That should make it, frankly, much more efficient. Well, we're already doing it. I'll be frank about that. We already are more efficient. And if we were to adopt or re-adopt the procedures as they exist there, it would slow things down quite a bit. So I think everybody is in favor of moving forward with changes. There is one new change, and that's the one I called out here in the synopsis. That's processes for proposals have this 2-month waiting period between the notice to submit and the actual submission. So the NISP and the proposal. So right now, those are treated as 2 separate processes. There is already a carve out for community colleges to expedite that and kind of eliminate the waiting period, because they often need to bring things into implementation very quickly. So they still have to be reviewed and approved by the commission, but they don't need to be posted and set for review for that extra waiting period, because if they did, their employer partners would be very disgruntled that the program is taking so long. So we, somebody has said something in the chat here. What was that? Thank goodness, yes. So as you can see from that comment, and this was generally the agreement among everybody in the open forum on this, everybody wants to get rid of the NISP. And what they mean is get rid of the 2-month waiting period. So basically there's one proposal that includes all of the information about a program. And that is how you all actually receive it. You don't receive 2 separate notifications, one at one meeting that they were intending to submit and another where you review the proposal. So this will mean basically 0 impact for the commission meetings, but quite a bit of impact for our institutions as they develop programs that they can be more nimble, similar to the way the community colleges already operate. And they can submit 1 packet of documents, and then we will continue to process them. Yes.
How much due diligence time does your group need from the time it's proposed to you?
That is a great question.
I'm assuming that's why the 2-month period was probably implemented.
I think the 2-month period did have to do with due diligence. It also had to do with other institution peer review, making sure that they had adequate amount of time to see what was coming down the pipe.
Sure. And that's fair. Yeah.
And so we do still have the peer review. That's not going away. We post it and we circulate those posts. We make sure that all the stakeholder groups know that everything's posted.
And what's your timeline on that? 2 weeks, a month, 30 days for them to respond back?
We try to give them a month and a half. I say try because sometimes it's a month, but it's no shorter than that. So just so y'all know kind of our background processes, we request that all programs that are proposed are due at the meeting before. So today is the due date for all proposals that could be considered for June.
Okay,
And the graduate proposals are actually due 2 weeks sooner because they take a little bit longer. So those are coming in, our staff, and you see us, the team around the table here, goes through, we see what's going on. We do an initial cut to see if there are major things that need additional information. And then we package those and post them on our public forum and then send out, hey, they're up there, make sure you get your reviews in. Now, to your question about what about if they take extra time? That does happen. I would say at least one proposal from every meeting does take more time than the review period that we have. So we basically have 3 months in between one meeting and the next meeting to review everything, package it, get the peer reviews, finalize the proposals. But some proposals do need extra work. And what we have done in that scenario is held that proposal for a future meeting. So this is invisible to you all as commission members. I've received positive comments from you all to say, oh, we do a good job vetting things and everything's in good shape when it comes to y'all. But some of that is because we do get proposals that are not ready for prime time, as Dr. Purcell might say. And there's a little bit more back and forth that happens and they just show up on a future meeting. So they get posted and they stay posted for much longer, but the documents come to you all once they're ready. So nothing in this change of eliminating this would guarantee that a proposal goes on to a certain meeting. So that's one thing that's still in there. If we get the proposal by the deadline, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going on the next meeting. We still have to do all of our due diligence and stakeholders, and when there are major issues, our process is to hold it until we resolve those issues, and then we bring it forward to y'all.
So the original or currently the NISP is just sort of an added step, but you're still doing the same things as the staff anyway, regardless of if it's coming or if it's not.
Right, and there is confusion with the institutions about, do we have to do the 2 months? I see our colleague over here nodding. So there have been internal processes created around this NISP. And I'm thinking specifically of, say, the UA system. I'm not sure how it works at ACCS, but when institutions are part of a system, that system has created its own bureaucracy around the NISP. And so formally eliminating it means that they can now hopefully be more efficient. Meaning that their boards don't have to review the NISP, they can review a single. Yeah, we had a couple of, Stephanie, I hate to put it on you, water or Jamarcus. Okay, sorry, break, okay.
Sorry.
So we got it taken care
I
of.
apologize.
No worries, okay. So that is to say the institutions, so rather than making everybody have a 2-month waiting period, this means that we'll eliminate the waiting period, all the information will come in at once, and just those proposals that need additional attention will have the waiting period for us to do what we need to do. Does that make sense?
Totally.
Yeah, so this, I would say, is definitely one area where we really fit within the governor's guidelines of streamlining red tape. Thought I saw another chat, but y'all saw before, thank goodness, right? And I'm sure those who are in the room, does anybody want to give a little hurrah for this or any additional background? Hurrah. Hurrah. Okay, this makes good sense. I like it. Yeah. And that has pretty much universally been the case with the open forum. The only questions were, well, how will we know when things are coming through the pipeline? And that right now, it's been inconsistent. It's been done. We have largely tried to channel everything through our stakeholder groups. And just so y'all know, the stakeholder groups for associate is the community college system. They have a process for managing, and I'm pointing here at Dr. Olson, who runs their academic and research shop. They have their internal processes with institutions. At the baccalaureate degree, the Council of College and University Chief Academic Officers, CUCAOs, that's the provost, they review. And then at the graduate level, it's the Alabama Council of Graduate Deans. And they are very active. And the way that we've organized this, we get all the proposals, we package them for each meeting, we post them, we request feedback, has actually generated a lot of more feedback. I don't know if y'all have noticed in reading the program staff recommendations, there have been a lot more that say 5 institutions responded to this proposal. Because back in the day, it used to be no institutions or maybe 1 institution. That batching according to the commission agenda has actually produced much more robust engagement from the institutions.
But it's also showing transparency as well too.
Mhm. Yeah.
And if another college or university might be thinking of the same program, oh, they're doing it, so.
Mhm. Yeah, and that was part of the reason for the NISP, was to give them an extra 2 months of advance notice. But what we did find from that original NISP information, you can't actually really tell that much. You can tell that an institution is thinking about a program, it'll be housed in a certain department. But most of the time, the institution is still working through the business plan and the curriculum. And without those 2 pieces, you can't really give meaningful feedback on the program. So the NISP had a good intent, but as it was implemented, it just never really served its purpose.
And
Yeah, check. All right, but again, like I said, the commission itself the business would not be affected really by this. This is much more about our stakeholders. All right, so section 04, this is a much smaller section. It was amended more recently, I think, to kind of touch things up a little bit. This section actually, even though it was touched recently, does need help. Because this would be the appropriate section to talk about post-implementation reporting, amendments, and review period. You all heard today some requested amendments to post-implementation. And none of that activity that's already occurring has actually been put into AICS regulations. So what we're proposing here is really just to document what's actually occurring. So the actions that are taken on post-implementation and any interventions that are made there have all been done through commission assent. So there have been motions to do certain things during the meeting, and then the commission does them, but they never actually made it into the official, on the books regulations. So we're just proposing documenting what we currently do. That means, those minimum viability standards, there'll be some language around the enrollment, the condition for maintaining a streamline of new enrollments. I believe the change in 2018 had to do with the employment condition that made it less of a requirement and more of an information, how are your graduates doing? And then there's the assessment, which is submitting a report. So over the years, aside from making the employment condition information only, we are also proposing a little more flexibility. So up until pretty recently. The assessment condition was very involved. It involved basically doing a kind of student learning outcomes assessment. And as our staff has evolved, and maybe they did previous to my tenure, but no longer, we don't have expertise on program assessment, like looking at student learning outcomes and ensuring that the outcome is met. There are offices within our institutions that do that professionally, and some of those are our academic liaisons. And so we felt that asking the institutions to submit a report like that to us was frankly busy work, because we couldn't evaluate it to the standard that it was being submitted. What we really needed to know was, are we meeting our graduates? Do we have enough enrollment to lead to our graduates? Are you tracking what your graduates do when they finish? And then any additional conditions around specialized accreditation and viability for other competing programs, that kind of thing. So we want to put that into the policies. We have also discussed in the open forum being a little bit more flexible around the enrollment condition. So y'all heard today, there was one post-implementation that requested just a modification to pass because their enrollments were over projected. Initially, they said, we think we're going to get this number, but they came in below that number. But they met their graduates and they had a pipeline, and we wanted to make that a little more flexible so that, frankly, we don't have to waste y'all's time in bringing those kind of modifications up to the commission. But we haven't had the ability to do that before. And maybe y'all don't want to give us that flexibility. Maybe you do want to hear the modification of conditions for enrollment. The graduate conditions are non-negotiable because those are in law and we're implementing the law, but the enrollment conditions are up to AICS and the commission's authority to set. Okay, our online constituent says, I like flexibility. So
So
do you,
you're saying that if they didn't meet what they said, we could let it slide as far as the enrollment in that graduates?
yes, or what I think we discussed with the open forum was actually making it proportional to the condition for graduates. So right now, the minimum is set for the graduates, and what we would recommend would be making the minimum new enrollments be 25% more than the graduate condition. That way, there's enough to account for attrition or late delays or some other thing. And we just have this minimum, and they have to meet the minimum, otherwise they really don't have a pipeline. And we do really need to hold it at that point. But otherwise, it's kind of a little bit of a gamble for the institutions. They're trying to, come in at a reasonable place, but internally they often have much higher enrollment expectations because they need the funding to support the program. So this would actually allow us to get a business plan that is more reflective of what the institutions actually intend, in my opinion. But we'll have to see. But that was the thinking. All right, I see y'all nodding, so maybe I've caused us to glaze over, but the goal ultimately would be y'all not having to review the ones that meet graduates, but not the enrollments.
I agree with that.
Good idea.
All right, so the next one, off-campus instruction. This was amended in 2007. So every so often you'll get these coming through as information items where there's a new off-campus site. This was definitely one of the original reasons that our agency was founded, was to be a kind of referee in the off-campus site space. Prior to online, and institutions were more interested in protecting their service areas and making sure that they had no competition from other institutions who are outside the area. This has been, updated periodically. Really, it needs some outdated definitions to go away. It needs some reformatting and renumbering, but it also does need a little bit of treatment on the service area. It was never really defined in the original policy, despite that being the main purpose of this. And so we wanted to put that definition in there. It does actually accompany by an attachment. So for those of you who have the paper copy, at the very end are attachments. These are actually in our regulations, the attachment that says what the service areas are. And that we are definitely recommending needs to go away because sometimes they change. In fact, the community colleges service areas are regularly updated by the system office and they drift. They have drifted quite a bit from what we have there, and we want to recognize their ability to regulate the service areas. This section was amended prior to their creation, so yeah, I think there's some tables and it shows which counties belong to which institutions, and we want to still have guidance around service areas. We just don't want it to be in the regulations. We'd rather just have it as a guideline document. So that again will allow for more flexibility, responsiveness to what's actually happening on the ground. Okay,
Good.
next one. Okay, so this one did actually have several, we had 2 open forums on this one. Extensions and alterations of existing programs and instruction. There's a lot that happens in this section, and for those of you who've been on the commission for a while, you may remember the time where extensions and alterations had to be approved by the commission. And that is when the commission packets used to be about twice as long, because each one had to go through and have its own summaries and presentation, just like new programs do now. So in 2018, that was changed so that most extensions and alterations are done as information items. And so they still get a thorough review, they just don't need to be approved. That authority was basically delegated, the commission delegated it to the staff. And in turn, institutions are able to move forward with these extensions by notifying us, not necessarily needing approval. They do need to notify before they do it. That's something they also have to do with the accreditor. So again, there's a need to align with what they're doing with the accreditor. But the conversations that we've had with our institutions, like I said, there were 2 open forums, really had to do with 2 things. One was trying to define what is substantive that needs approval, like we saw today, the substantive modification. So there's a new program entry into the program inventory that we would still consider substantive, needs your approval. And then a second layer of substantive that really just needs notification. That would be equivalent to our information items. And then formally adopting a third level, which is non-substantive, that says INC really does not need to know about this change, as in when you change some of your courses to be online, or when we change, we get rid of a few courses and bring in some new ones. Like some of those things just really do not rise to the level of what INC needs to be concerned with. And so we would want to be able to say that clearly. Again, that'll free up the institutions to carry on their business without our need to recognize it. So that's one tranche of concerns around this section. The other one has to do with non-degree certificates. So as AICS regulations are constructed, non-degree certificates, so those are all the workforce certificates, short-term, post-bac, these are all considered extensions of existing programs. And right now they come through as information items. So the institutions do those extensions and then they let us know before they actually start enrolling students. And we wanted to make a little more clarity around this section of the different types of non-degree certificates, where the scope of AIC is limited. For instance, we don't want to be involved in non-degree certificates, or excuse me, non-credit, non-degree, but only for credit, not non-credit. So there are quite a few workforce programs the community colleges do, some outreach programs that our universities do, and we have not been involved, but we also want to be clear that we're not involved, so we don't get the questions. And the conversations have been around how to organize it and clarify, but by and large, people have been in support of the changes that we're recommending to these sections. Okay. All right, how are we doing on time? We're gonna go a little quicker now. We made it through the big sections here. All right, so section 7, operational policy on inactive status and reinstatement of programs was amended 1997. It's a relatively small section. It has to do with what you can see here we call the status of programs. So almost all of our programs are active. I think in our program inventory, there are about 6,000 or 6,500 entries. 5,000 of them are active programs. And those are the ones that you all hear new program proposal. When it's approved, it becomes active. And the programs that are in post-implementation monitoring are active. And then those that have met their viability are also active. And inactive is when an institution wants to put a program on pause. There's some kind of disruption. They've lost some faculty, or they're trying to go through an accreditation process that means they can't enroll new students. And they want to say, we want to do this program, but we're going to pause new students. But we're going to come back to it. And this policy had allowed that to happen. It does happen still, it's very rare. We don't want to take away inactive status, but right now I want to say that there are fewer than 50 inactive status programs in the inventory. So it's pretty infrequent. These regulations do talk about if it's not reactivated in 5 years, it'll be made deleted. So deleted is when the program, and you'll remember Margaret Cavell, she was the one leading a lot of the work before I came here, keeping us on the straight and narrow. So, okay, so what we are proposing for this section is that it would be expanded to talk about status overall, not just inactive. Because right now there are no regulations around deleted status. What does it mean to be deleted? And we do have operational things around submitting data. Institutions submit us data on program completions. It would be very helpful for us to have a full definition. The other thing that happens with our data processing is moved programs. So this is somewhat invisible to you all, and I can see our institutional reps going. So when a program changes its CIP code, the program at the new CIP code is a new entry in our inventory. And we've had to develop a system for marking the old program. And that new system is called Moved. So we have a record. This is a part of our archival work to track how programs have evolved over time. And you all already received notification as a program update, inventory updates. But we would like to be able to, be more transparent about how that works and just let everybody know this is what we do. This is how it works for the data processing. Okay. No, I see nodding, so no real questions on that. Okay. Okay, next one. Okay, so these two, I haven't put a lot in here for 08 and 09. That's because we didn't talk about these in the open forum. It is very likely that these are completely obsolete. There may be a few things that needs to be kept. But as they stand, designating branch campus sites was something AIC had been really involved in. For example, of zip code change. Well, I'll talk about that, Mary Beth. We'll do that offline. Yeah. But Okay, so on designation of branch campuses. So as opposed to an off-campus site where you're kind of just going for a class or two somewhere, a branch campus is like a full operational center. And this does happen. There are branches. I've heard new branches are very rare these days. Institutional footprints are pretty settled. And so it seems like, do we really need a policy on something we're going to hear once in a blue moon? Maybe not. AIC would still have a role in branch campuses should there ever be one. The same way that AIC would have a role in institutional mergers. And right now, the most recent institutional merger, I believe, was Coastal Alabama Community College. And that was governed by this regulation 09 review and approval of 2-year mergers. That merger happened right around the time that ACCS itself was coming into being, if I'm not mistaken. And so it hadn't been worked out how that was going to be, but currently ACCS would be doing the lion's work in merging of 2-year institutions, and the commission would have a role in making sure stewardship of state resources and other things. So it wouldn't mean we would not have a role if we did away with this, but we might need to condense this into the commission will review these things. Basically, just kind of very short. This section also doesn't include 4-year institutions. And I don't know if anybody here was on the commission when Troy went through its merger, which was back in 2005. The commission did have a substantial role in approving the merging of the Troy State, Montgomery, Troy State, Dothan, and Troy, Maine into one institution. And the accreditor also did. So even though there was actually no regulation on the book, the commission still had its responsibilities to do. So my recommendation for 9 would either be expand it to include 4 years or to just consolidate it down to the minimum. But further discussion is needed on that one. Okay. All right, this is the last one that we have actually on the books, distance education. This is a really recent addition. It was adopted in 2018, so it's definitely the most recent. And I alluded to this earlier in talking about non-resident institutions. But this has to do with only Alabama institutions offering distance education. And the way that AIC reviews their distance education offerings. And there's quite a bit of confusion actually around this right now, because institutions have to notify the accreditor when they move program percentage to distance. So it's an in-person program. If they decide to offer 50% distance education, they have to let the accreditor know. That has to do with program quality. And for AIC's purposes, our recommendation is that we would really like to only know if it's 100% distance, to know that it's kind of falling under this SARA in reciprocity, where they're potentially offering those programs to students in other states. And we want to be able to track which programs are doing that. So really we're looking to just clarify what percentage of the program. That should make it actually easier for everybody. And you all as commissioners do see these as an information item, notification of distance education. So that's coming from this section. All right, so 2 new sections. I'll try to be quick here. The first is what AIC has called micro-credential designation. The idea here being, there's this focus on work-based learning, is to try and differentiate between those non-degree certificates that are aligned with what the workforce need is. In our multiple conversations with stakeholders, there's a lot of confusion in the marketplace around micro-credentials and around AIC's role in regulating them. And so the stakeholders are working. So we have language this would entail. But at this point, we actually don't want to move forward with that language. We want to hold it until we can shape it up so that the stakeholders who recommended further study feel comfortable. Potentially before we get maybe some guidance from the Alabama Committee on Credentialing and Career Pathways. They're trying to do a credential value thing. That's part of the governor's office and Department of Commerce. AIC is represented, or Dr. Purcell represents AIC on that committee. So it seems like now is just maybe not the time to move forward with this, unless you all are really eager to stake your claim in micro credentials, which we can support that as well, but if not,
We can pause.
we can pause. Okay. All right, before we go on, let me see. Yes. All right, so our last proposed section, this is something that I will say our institutions are really clamoring for. We've got at least 2 institutions that have reached out to our staff and said, you know, we really want to talk about expanding our instructional role. And if you all remember, the last time the commission reviewed one of these was Athens State went through, I want to say it was about 2 years ago now, to become a master's granting institution. They were baccalaureate only. And there are a couple of institutions who are master's granting that want to have that instructional role expanded to be able to offer doctorate. So, and particularly practice doctorates. So the one there were a couple we talked about today. I'll remind you of the PhD in social work that was from Alabama A&M. They're already approved as a doctoral granting institution. So they have that as part of their role, and that's a research doctorate, and that moved forward through normal process. The one just after it, the Ed.D. from Auburn University of Montgomery, you heard me talk about it being outside their instructional role because they're masters. That is a practice doctorate, and so we want to be able to give a process that describes how institutions can go about having a review for their practice doctorates if they're masters only, and also if they want to be able to do that without additional scrutiny. So there are guidelines. Right now, all of this is governed by a document that the commission approved under guidelines of instructional role. It defines a little bit in very sketchy terms what instructional role is, so we want to beef that up a little bit. But as part of that guidelines document, happened in 2015, there was a system developed where an institution had to do 3 single subject approvals and have those go through and be successful before they could ask for a role change. And that those single subject reviews would be analyzed or evaluated by the staff and the commission through a lens of strategic benefit, which is a higher threshold of review than the typical review. Specifically, strategic benefit has a lot to do with industry need and also competition with other institutions. So when you're thinking about duplication of programs, that strategic benefit has a little more teeth to it around not having duplication. The typical review considers duplication, but a lot of times will come back around to institutional mission and does this fit in the mission, that kind of thing. So what we are proposing for this section is to take those guidelines and put them into the regulations and also make a few tweaks that will actually allow institutions a little more flexibility around bringing forward practice-focused doctorates as opposed to research-focused doctorates. So that there would be still a role change scrutiny that would be needed for research doctorates, but more flexibility around the Ed.Ds, social work, physical therapies, that kind of thing. This does need some more discussion, and we've already got it on the books with the graduate deans. They would be the primary stakeholder group, because when you're talking about expanding instructional role to a higher level, you're really meaning about going into a graduate level. So a master's or a doctorate. And so this is on their retreat agenda, which is actually this month. So our hope is we'll have some resolution on that ahead of the June meeting. And we'll be able to bring forward a policy. It is possible that this might get held, but like I said, we've got 2 institutions in the wings who've been asking, when is this gonna go forward? And we've been saying, oh, we don't want to process your role change until we actually have a policy on the books. So our hope is that all of this, except for the 2 sections and micro credentials, will go through the full vetting process. That will have the language, it'll be posted with the program reviews. And that we'll feel confident having it up for preliminary approval on the June 8th agenda.
Will we meet again to go over the changes, or will it just be given to the commission as a whole?
Well, I'm glad you asked that, because that's what we have to decide right now, is how much involvement you all want to have in reviewing it ahead of the June meeting.
Well, my thoughts are that we trust y'all, and everything you've said today is just kind of blown me away. I agree with everything. I think it's important to let the commissioners know what's going on. I don't know if we necessarily need to meet again, but I'll leave that to you and Jim.
I would say yes, but I would also say that whatever you do come as a recommendation, I think that we probably need to meet so that we can be an advocate for them.
Yeah.
So that we can, say how much work y'all have to do. We've done the open forums, and that this is what the groups decided they have. I just feel if we're gonna be the committee and you're gonna present it, I would like to see what was decided. So again, I put my rubber stamp on it, I agree. Cause I know I'm gonna agree, but I also feel that it's one, being transparent with us all, but then also being an advocate for them at that table.
If you're planning on for the June meeting, would it be possible for us to get together maybe by Zoom that Thursday afternoon before? Would that be possible?
Yeah.
So our plan, after going through all the vetting, is to have the full packet. And it's gonna be a little bit of trying to figure out how do we market, like underline what's new and what's old and all that. It's gonna be a kind of a rigmarole, but when everything's ready for the commission to vote on, we're gonna post it with the new academic program proposals. And one thing we could do is let you
We meet
know.
then
Yeah,
before you post it.
so if you wanna meet before you post it, we can do that, or you can meet after we post it where everyone else is reviewing it and y'all are reviewing it at the same time as them.
Whatever you think.
Because it's not fixed at that point, it's just posted
Yeah.
and people can send us comments. Yeah, that would give us more time, frankly, because if we try to do it before, trying to get it to y'all in enough time to post,
Is it realistic to do all this by June?
3 months.
well, you saw, we've been working on it for almost a year.
That's why he's saying what he's saying.
Mhm.
I mean, I
should
don't
it
want
be
y'all to be
6
pressured.
months?
Yeah.
I mean, should it be, because you have 2 more that you haven't even had an open discussion.
Right, well, those actually may not come in this packet, given all of the extended review that's gonna have to happen of all of AIC's policies because of this executive order, we could actually do those during one of the other phases.
Sure.
Yeah, and that would actually be my proposal. I don't wanna
Yeah, you've got
necessarily
it.
tackle those.
Yeah, sure.
It's first Friday of June.
It is.
And
Well,
so-
Might
what-
be able to do it in the June meeting. Well, it was September meeting might not be bad.
Right.
December is always not bad.
And just so y'all know, the way it works is you have to, because of administrative procedures and the governor's executive order will cause us to do extra due diligence. There are 2 votes. So it will be preliminary approval at one meeting. And then it goes up on the official administrative code website. And then it's finally approved at the second meeting. So if it goes up in June, it's actually not approved until September. But if you put it up for preliminary in September, it won't be finally approved until December.
December.
So that's, where I don't think from a staff perspective, we mind having more time, we can go that way, but we also do feel this pressure from the institutions that want to move forward with the instructional role. And also the pressure from the other institutions who want to get rid of the NISP finally.
They have a projected timeline that they are trying to get that final.
Yeah,
done.
well, I think institutions often work on an academic calendar. So having clear guidance at the beginning of the summer for what then could come in September that they can then organize next academic year around would be really helpful to them. Versus if you wait till December, you're kind of making it 1 year out for their implementation cycle.
So maybe we plan on, meeting by Zoom, maybe before the packets go out to the entire commission.
Oh, yeah,
That way we're all on the same page before it goes out, and then,
Would that be enough time?
oh, yes, yes.
because it'll be posted at that point. And-
Yeah, and posted for review, right?
Yeah.
But then there's still gonna be a month and a half between that and when the agenda is finalized.
Right.
So then, things do change in that time, because we're working on finalizing things, so.
Okay.
All right, so we'll be back in touch. We'll plan to do it by Zoom. And y'all will have the language.
Great work by all of
Yeah.
y'all. So,
This is excellent.
it's good stuff.
Kudos to all of you.
All right. Happy weekend all.
Yes.
Thank y'all for sticking around. I know I gave you an hour and 10 minutes. but-
Good.
Good job.
I am out of the country that last week in May for the preaching that started to happen. Labor Day.
Oh, over Labor. Memorial, yeah, always get the.
I'm not.